Welcome to the Northeast Kingdom Voice. I'm your host, Scott Wheeler. Today's guests are two men who are here to talk about the Abenaki of the border region, the real Abenaki, and very possibly the not so real Abenaki. Welcome to the show. I'll let you introduce yourselves.
Hi, I'm Dana LaPlante. I'm basically on today as to advocate for modern descendants from Odanak that live in the state of Vermont. And my family name's Obumswin. I'm a direct descendant from Odanak.
Mm-hmm. Jacques?
Yes, quite a Thank you, Scott, for having us. And I salute all your listeners. My name is Jacques Watso. I'm an Abenaki from Odanak, which is a small village in the south of Quebec. And Vermont is part of our ancestral territory, and we are pleased to be here today to explain a little bit of our history.
Right. Yeah, because in the last few years, Vermont has really jumped on the Abenaki bandwagon by recognizing the Abenaki of Vermont, and I understand there's a little bit of dissension on that. And Jacques, you might be able to explain, why that should not have occurred.
Oh yes, of course. Well, our homelands of the Abenaki are part of New England and southern Quebec, and through colonial wars, we were pushed up north, and some stayed behind, and some traveled through since colonial times up to today. Traveled on the territory to work, to occupy the territory, to sell crafts, but not just crafts, but also to sell their knowledge and to live a peaceful life within the ancestral territory outside of the border of our reservation, which is Odanak. And we won't go through the whole history, but that's what happened in a time frame of about 300 years. There was a lot of movement and got pushed up north through colonial times. And here in Canada, we are under since the Confederation of 1867, we are under the Indian Act. It's a law that governs all First Nations in Quebec. And they have the Indian Act, a reserve system, and Odanak is a reserve, what you call in the United States a reservation. And it was a very discriminatory act. And the purpose of the Indian Act was to assimilate the First Nations. And we were forced to go to boarding schools, residential schools, and the Catholics, Abenaki of Odanak, went to the day school here in the community, and they were taught by their Grey nuns. And in these schools, up till the 1960s, they were told that it was bad to be a Abenaki, it was bad to be an Indian, it was bad to be your culture, your heritage, your spirituality was bad. And this was taught for over 150 years to the Indigenous people, not just people in Odanak, but all across Canada and in the United States. I'm not too familiar with the residential schools in the United States, but here is what happened in Canada. And all through this systemic racism that exists within the Canadian society, we lost part of our culture out of shame, out of the government's policies to assimilate us. Now, coming to Vermont being our ancestral territory, there was always a migration of the Abenaki people on our territory. We have a specialty, which is black ash basket, the basket industry. And all the way up to the 1940s, we would go sell our baskets in Vermont, New Hampshire, Maine, all the way up to Massachusetts. And that was our specialty. Because of the Indian Act, we had an Indian agent in Odanak that forbid us to sell our baskets. We had to sell it through him because we were we were very fortunate to make a lot of money off of a basket trade. They shut us down by preventing us to participate in the free market because we were Indian, making too much money. So that we stopped our basket industry. Now, coming to Vermont, there's an interesting part is that all of New England, there was a large migration of French Canadian from southern Quebec that moved or immigrated to the United States at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution to come to work. In southern Quebec, it was mostly a Catholic agricultural society, and people were poor. There was large families, and they had a lot of mouths to feed, and there was no prospect of industrious or decent livelihood. So there was a large migration to New England and a lot of towards Vermont, and they participated in in the Industrial Revolution. But since they were Catholic and of French Canadian descent, they were first class citizens. They were considered second class citizens, and through time, through second, third, and fourth generation of these French Canadian, they became Franco American and now Americans with a French Canadian ancestor. They participated in the livelihood of Vermont. And in the 1970s, there was a movement, 1970s and 80s, of people claiming Native ancestry because the French Canadians, when they started colonization in New France, they sent mostly the men to colonize the northern hemisphere, and they had mixed marriages in the 1600s before the French women started to migrate over here. So they're basing their ancestor on a they're basing the people in Vermont today are basing their claims to nativehood through that French Canadian marriage that happened in 1665. People of Vermont are of French Canadian descent. Instead of embracing the French Canadian ancestry that they have, they claimed an ancestor to a 14th or 15th generation native ancestor from New France at the beginning of the colony, and that's their claim to being Abenaki, and that those people those mixed marriages that are claiming to are not even Abenaki. So it was very profitable to claim native ancestry, because it's better to be an Indian, because you have all the mysticism that comes with it of being that noble land protector, that noble Indian that you see in Hollywood movies. And these people in Vermont, instead of claiming that French Canadian ancestry, they started to claim native ancestry and playing the role of Indian, not playing the role of Abenaki, of playing that myth of the noble Indian. And they portray the image of white settlers, what white settlers have of the First Nations. And they are rewriting our history, rewriting our culture, and it's all based on a false pretense that they are Abenaki, which they are not. They are some Abenaki in the state of Vermont, but you can clearly identify them. And these four groups that were recognized by the state of Vermont, they misled the Vermont legislator, and today these groups are profiting off Vermont taxpayers' money in the perspective that they are doing identity and cultural theft on behalf of my Abenaki ancestry. So the people of Vermont were misled by these individuals that control these groups to project the concept that they are of native ancestry. And when you ask about their ancestry and all that, they cannot prove their ancestry, and that's why we are raising red flags. Is that all we ask is prove your ancestry, and we all know that there are of French Canadian descent, and there's a new study that came out by a sociologist who did the due diligence of fact checking these groups, and he comes to the conclusion that 98% of the members of these groups are not of Abenaki or indigenous descent, but they are of French Canadian descent. They are doing what we call race shifting, is that they're negating their own cultural ancestry to embrace another ancestry that is not theirs. That's called race shifting, and because it's it's easier to embrace this noble Indian concept than to embrace the white settlers' colonialistic, racist policies of the past. I'm not saying that it's still going on today, but we are working in a reconciliation process to make peace with our past, and both from the indigenous standpoints and the white settlers standpoint, to move forward together to continue building on both sides of the American and Canadian border. But these people are misleading the state, the population of Vermont. So it's shameful because it's cultural and identity theft. And it started small by people just enjoying native culture and ancestry, and then they started doing arts and crafts, and they started to rewrite their own family histories, and to like you were talking about postcards and old pictures, and people would would take old family pictures and say they look like an Indian, so I must be Indian. Then they became Indian, and after 40 years of repeating these lies in Vermont society, it became the truth that they were Abenaki. So when you repeat a lie often enough, it becomes the truth. And people, when us in Odanak, when we started raising these red flags, they say, well, we've been doing it for so long that we don't have, that we don't know anything else. So what's the harm that we're doing? What's the harm that they are doing? Because they are, like I said, rewriting our history, rewriting our family history, because these are our family, either they're Bamsawin or Watso. We occupied those territories, and now they are claiming our family histories, and they're not part of those family histories. And we got the family names of the Watso, the Bamsawins. Those are Beneki names. And Vermont, from the Odanak, it's a 1 hour drive to the border, so it's not that far. And how come us, through all the residential school and all the racism that we suffered here on the reservation, we still have those family names, and there's not one that can claim a historical Abenaki name in the state of Vermont, because they all said they were hiding in plain sight. But you got Mr. LaPlante here. His family wasn't hiding in plain sight. They were here. They were selling baskets. They had trades. They were working. They were contributing to the Vermont society all through these generations. And nobody was hiding in plain sight. And they were not victim of the eugenics process that they claim to be. That's just a deflection from the fact that we are asking them to to just come clean with the fact that they are not indigenous, but they're so deep within the lie that today I consider it to be fraud on behalf of the Vermont taxpayers. They are defrauding through public funds and accessing public monies from taxpayers that are reserved for indigenous people, but they are not indigenous people. So that's a no-no. And the state legislator, like I said, were misled, and now they're starting to ask questions, because we are intervening as a government, because I'm an elected official. So we try to reach out to different political sphere of the state of Vermont. It's very complicated, because the dynamics is different from over here on this side of the border, but it's still our ancestral territory, and we are caretakers of that territory. We're not trying to, because we were told by these groups that are trying to do some land grabs, that we were in cahoots with Hydro-Quebec to get some funding, that we were trying to get a casino. But no, we are caretakers of our ancestral territory. And as caretakers, it's our job to honor our ancestors. And when you claim my ancestor and they are not your ancestors, then that becomes problematic, because it's disrespectful for those that came before, and you are playing the role of an Indian. You're not a real Abenaki. And today they have the audacity to tell us that our culture is not well lived, hence we will live it for you. And that one of the chiefs told us that we would crawl back on our knees to relearn our own culture over there in Vermont. That was it's very racist and condescending, because that's the big loophole of colonialism. That's like the achievement, is that they are erasing us by replacing us, and that's what these French Canadians are doing. And they should just come clean and and stop doubling down on their lies and stop accessing public monies that it's not reserved for them. So I don't know. That's kind of the position of Odanak. And like I said, we are the caretakers of our culture, our history, our songs, our dances, and they are not in a position to rewrite our history. There's a lot of scholars in the state of Vermont that claim Abenaki ancestry, and they are rewriting history to fit their narrative to justify their lies. And it's shameful because as a anthropologist, historian, or whatnot, you're supposed to be held by a code of conduct, a code of ethics, and to be a code of integrity towards yourself and your research. You can't lie and rewrite history, because that's not truthful. I don't know. I've been talking a lot there, but that's about it there for.
You know, when you're talking about rewriting history, one of the former chiefs of this region happens to share the bloodline of my wife and with Dana on his non-native side. And we watched this, as I say, chief rewrite our family history, as in my wife's family history. And little did he understand, there were still several older residents that could call BS on him. He went as far as to take photos that were not of the people who said they were. They were obviously more native looking, but he really hoodwinked a lot of people, because my wife's family has zero native ancestry, and I took exception to that as being a history person. Is if my wife had native ancestry, so be it, but she had zero. And he was out there singing and dancing down at the state house, and he was a chief, having the time of his life.
Well, that's called cultural appropriation and identity theft, because it's more noble. It's fun to when they sing the song and they play the drum and they burn the sage and they do all this hocus pocus. But it's very disrespectful to those that do the ceremonies, that have the original teachings of these ceremonies. They are just plain role playing and just doing that's very disrespectful. Sometimes I say just because I like rice and I like Bruce Lee movies, that doesn't make me a Chinese individual. And I'm just trying to paraphrase, but we see that a lot. We saw that in Vermont, that a lot of people are plain Indian, like the chief you're mentioning. And here in Quebec, all through, because of the French Canadian ancestry, everybody's got like a 15th generation native ancestor, but they forget about the 4,000 other ancestors of French Canadian descent, and they focus on that one individual, and they become that one. They embrace that one culture that's less than 1%, 1.0%. So that's very frustrating for the older ancestor that you're turning your back on, and to just play Indian is for that chief. To him, it flattered his ego, because what happens is that it flatters their ego, but they become they become the center of attention. They become somebody, because before they were just like a French Canadian or Franco-American Vermonter, but now they become somebody that people listen to and they look up to, and they play the role. They play the role of this noble Indian in communion with nature and protector of the land, and they pull back their shoulders and they talk with all this mysticism and wisdom and sacred perspective that you would see in a Hollywood movie. I speak on behalf of Creator, and it's a lot, like you said, it is a lot of BS, because it's very disrespectful to your family, your own family history, not just the family history. Genealogy is very simple. You got a father and a mother, and they have a father and mother too, and that's how you back up. But to say that they just popped up after they found that native ancestry, or not even no native ancestry. It was just a social club, and it becomes a bit like a cult structure where you have a chief that embraces people's vulnerability and their own identity, and when they find that they can embrace a native identity, it reconforts their own insecurities, and they just go with it. And the chiefs on top, they profit off of it because there are people of low self-esteem that have identity crisis, and they prey on these people just like a cult leader, and they need the numbers to advocate bigger grants, and it's a big cult structure. And it's a shame that Vermont legislators were misled by these groups. They thought they were doing the good thing. They're doing coming at peace with the colonial past and doing good with history. And it's all noble in theory, but in practice, they got misled, and they got. So now it's up to the state legislator to just backtrack and cancel out the state legislator and hold the people accountable that misled the Vermont taxpayers and the Vermont legislation.
This is the way I look at it. You tell me if I'm right or wrong. We took, I'm not sure of how it all worked with the native land. We took the land, but it took our government, they had the ability to rob you of your culture, or at least to assist in the robbing of your culture through legislation. Is that what happened?
Yeah, well, through history, that's what happened here in Canada, here in the States. You see the trail of broken tiers and all the treaties that were broken. Same thing in Canada, because we had like large territories when the reservation system started in the beginning of Confederation, but they kind of took everything, and everything was shrunken down because we live in southern Quebec, fertile lands and all that. And today Odanak is on a swamp. They gave us the swampland, and they took all the right thing. And that's what colonialism is. And they did whether it's the British or the French, they did the same thing all across the planet. It's not specific to Vermont. Like I was saying, there's not just in the state of Vermont, but there was a lot of bad decision made to get rid of the Indian problem, we call it, there through colonial time in the States and in Canada. So people today, the governments and the legislator and people in general, either it's Vermont or anywhere else in North America, they're trying to do well on their on reconciliation and forgiving and building the nation building between our peoples, and to come to terms with our colonial past and move forward from it. Not just be stuck in self-pity on our perspective and be in the guilt of the white settlers, but to move forward together. And I think these groups in Vermont, they profited from this situation of what we call white guilt or settlers guilt, and they used it to profit their own little organizations or social clubs, that we call them. We don't call them tribes over here. We call them social clubs. And basically, like I said, it's misleading. They misled the state legislator. It's shameful because the state of Vermont wanted to do good with the indigenous voices in Vermont, and they got really sidetracked by these groups.
I would love to tell you you're right about being misled in the sense of that they unknowingly, but I actually believe it was a little more they purposely allowed themselves to be misled, especially with the current. I worry about this current group because they do a lot of misleading in the state house. So I actually believe that it was more of a purposeful misled because it was the cool thing to do. And they just went along with it. And I believe the current makeup of the legislature is even probably a bit worse, where they do so much virtue signaling that they, so I believe they'll probably dig their heels in, but I hope not. I hope they do the right thing.
Yeah, I sure hope they do.
And I will tell you, I've probably made some missteps as a writer myself, which I apologize for, but I think I've kind of made up for it a bit. I've written about the Obomsawans through various people. I'm friends with Tim Delabriere, who is Skip Bernier's grandson, who is from the Obomsawan family. Gertrude Essoff, she's 100, and she is her mother came from Odanak. Paul Lehar is an Obomsawan. Now, are you familiar with those names?
Yes, they're but like I know Skip because he still has property here. My brother lives in his house over here in Odanak. I know Tim Delabriere, so they're other like second or third generation Beneke that moved from Vermont to Odanak, then back to Vermont, and reestablished themselves over there. So that's what I was saying at the beginning of the podcast, that there was a migration from different region, not just in Vermont. Like my family, they moved to Albany, New York, and they went there for work in the 50s and 60s, and they established themselves over there. But before that, they'd go to Vermont and do the basket trade down in Burlington, and some in Highgate, some in New Hampshire. So we were always on the territory, and it's nice to see that some families stayed behind, and they just occupied the territory, and they lived their peaceful lives. And it's nice to see that they're all over, spread all over. But we can trace those families, like you're an historian, so you were able to trace those families because they're part of the Vermont society, and they weren't hiding in plain sight. They were living their lives as normal human beings, and that's it. We got all these families on the territory, and it's always a diaspora that's on the ancestral territory. But we always kept in communication. And when someone says I'm a Beneke, and we ask the question, but where are you a Beneke from? Like Dana and LaPlante, we're knowing each other for the last 6 months. And then he just said, well, my name is Dana, and this is my family. This is my so it adds up instantly. We can instantly link up. When you see other chiefs from or people that claims a Beneke ancestry in Vermont, it's not the same situation, because there's always a story. There's always something that doesn't add up. There's always a family lore, or we were always told that we were Indian, but we weren't allowed to talk about it and all that. But meanwhile, we're just here. Some people were in Newport or anywhere in Vermont, and they were screaming high. They weren't ashamed to share their culture, even if they were victim of racism. You are who you are. You're a Beneke Indian, so you can't switch your cultural background. And so it doesn't add up when these groups they talk about their family history. They were in hiding, or when we ask about their baptism, they always say that the church burnt where the baptism was stored. So we ask which church is that, and we're in which town, so we can fact check that. They don't know, because it's all a lie there. And but one thing that the French Canadian Jesuits did well was write the history and write the movement of every Catholic in the province of Quebec. So all those that went to Vermont, they're all well documented on this side of the border, because they're like I said, 98% are French Canadian descent. So we all know, and we can all retrace them all the way to the boat when they first got here. And I have some French Canadian in my family, so how come I can trace my French Canadian ancestry all the way to Saint Malo in France, where my ancestor Jean Thériault took the boat in 1643 and to come to North America, but then they can't even name their own grandmother, because they say I don't know the name of my grandmother, my Indian grandmother, but that's your mother's mother, so you're supposed to know her name, and you're supposed to know her family history, and you're supposed to know uh, the truth about your own family. You can't reinvent that. And to say that there's 15,000 Abenaki that's all have the same story, because you ask one or another, they will all come up with the same story, that they were hiding in plain sight, that they were the church burnt, and that they had to hide their family history and their baptism birth. So they,
A common one that I keep hearing is, I can trace my ancestry back to the 1500s. I hear that constantly.
yeah, well, that's that French Canadian ancestor marriage from. I can even name the names that woman. Her name is Marie Sylvestre Metabichuan. She got married in 1643, and they all claim ancestry to her, like the 2 million descendant that she has today in the province of Quebec.
Right.
So, but you don't have 2 million Quebecers claiming native ancestry. They are saying, I'm a Quebecer who has a mixed origin. Some people, they got Portuguese, some are French, some have Anglo-Saxon, Scottish, Irish ancestry, but it's all a mix of those 4,000 ancestors from New France. But they all claim that one that you say that I can claim my ancestry from 1500, but all the French Canadian can claim a native ancestry from the 1500s. It's shameful because it's misleading. They don't have the community continuity or family continuity. They just invented their ancestry in the 1990s or 2000s, but there was like a 400-year gap that they can't fill. But now they're claiming ancestry. Like I said about my European ancestors, I can trace it back all the way back to Theodoric the first of the Visigoth Empire, of that population that was decimated in the 8th century. So how come you can't even you don't even know your grandmother's name, your Abenaki name? It's shameful to the Vermont history, because it's not it's a historical I don't know, a historical fraud, because these people are cultural predators, and they prey on our culture and our ancestry, which is well documented and is still being lived today without a continuous breakage.
Right. Then there's the people, they're getting their DNA done, whether it be through Ancestry or 23andMe. Like Senator Elizabeth Warren was recently in hot water in recent years, for saying she was Native American, took, I believe, even some financial benefits and positions within a college because of her Abenaki identity. But when she was called out on it, she turned to DNA and found out she had a drop of native blood. Does a DNA test actually make you native?
No, 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 because there are mixed marriages in communities, and it's not about like 60 scoops or people trying to reconnect. It's about continuous cultural lineage. And it's not about the blood quantum, because we get that a lot from the fake tribes in Vermont that we're trying to post blood quantum. That's not the fact. Is that you can't just invent the persona of being a Benaki. In the case of Warren, she benefited off of claiming native ancestry, because there are certain benefits for indigenous people because of all the racism from colonial times.
Right.
They were sort of second or third class citizens. The institutions or government is trying to make good with the past, so they offer certain benefits or easier access to jobs or opportunity in schools and teachings or whatnot, and that's reserved for native individuals. Now, if you claim native ancestry, because when they do all these policies, they don't fact check, and you can just fill out the form and say you're of such descent, and they don't ask questions. But now these days they're asking a lot of questions, and we see it here all across North America, that schools that are taking back honoraries degrees, and firing people that claim native ancestry, which is what wasn't true. And Senator Warren, that's what she did. It benefited her position as a senator, and at the same time, it takes away the guilt from the colonial past by saying, "Well, I have native ancestry, so I can't be racist, or I can detach myself from that colonial past." And it doesn't work that way. And you have to have that continuous family ties to the community, which we have, the Abenaki, and which the four groups and members of those four groups don't. So the DNA, we don't rely on that here, and nobody really relies on that except the people that are trying to claim or self-identify as Indigenous. Because the database is all corrupt. Because if you're not a real Indian, and you claim to be, let's say, a Benaki, and you end up, your blood ends up as a sample example in the DNA bank database, then it flaws the results.
Right.
And
Right.
it's painful.
So, Dana, here's a question for you: Is since you do come from a Abenaki line, your ancestry goes back to Odanak. Um, well, a lot of people say, over the years, I've heard people say, well, Vermont Abenaki didn't often disclose who they were because of a negative connotation towards being Native American. I kind of think it's opposite. I think there has been I think most people in the community understood there were a certain number of them who were real frauds. I can think of two chiefs that were, just straight out frauds. And I think the people like you might actually say the frauds have made it a little more difficult for you to publicly claim ownership of your native identity.
Oh, for sure. I mean, I don't even know where to start. And I mean, it's so disheartening because you automatically, if I was to say, my family's from Odanak, my family name's Obumswin, they look at me like, I'm just another, like, I could have been from one of these other four tribes.
Right.
I mean, it's not, and it puts me in a position, like, because like you said, half of my family on my mother's side, they're European. I mean, I don't look Native American at all. I just, and they look at you like you're from outer space. And I mean, my grandfather, you can tell by, appearance wise that he would look native, it just, and I think, that's part of, my father tried to get involved with showcasing these fraudulent people down here for he's passed away now, but for 30 years he toted the message down here of how much they were frauds and what they were doing was, identity theft and the whole 9 yards. It's just ridiculous.
I think a lot of people got caught up in that. I've heard it be said, cool to be Indian period of time. Okay. And
well, and we live in an age where if you self-identify as something, well, you've got to be it. You've got to be, if people walk around here and say they identify as Native American, this state says, sure, here you go. And here's all the benefits of claiming to be Native. I mean, just for an example, I've paid for my hunting and fishing license for 30 years. But I see it every day. There's people that belong to these four tribes. They get free hunting and fishing license. in Vermont because they belong to these tribes.
Right.
I mean, if that's not, you know,
No.
fraud, you know, I don't know what is.
Right. What do you think, Dana? Do you think the state will reverse course or not?
It's an uphill battle that I am willing to put on the forefront of any legislative session going forward. I mean, it's got out of hand so far now that I mean, even the current administration, I think they've taken the position where they have no plans to revisit it. The last thing I heard. So we gotta just keep putting it on the table.
Right.
You know.
Yeah, I really worry because, as I said, the current leadership. I don't mean the governor necessarily, but I think there's a lot of people who spend a lot of time virtue signaling and not doing the right thing. I think they're actually pretty oppressive, and I think they'll continue to deny the claims from Odanak.
Yes. There's a fallacy that says that when you're duped by someone that manipulates you, you tend to not acknowledge that you were misled,
Right.
and you felt that that you're a well-educated individual that was caught up in this lie, and you got misled. So it's hard to acknowledge that you were misled. So you just keep on doubling down on that lie too. You become a defend Indian, we call someone that defends the pretend Indians. So it's hard to explain there. Like I said, my first language is French there, but there is something, and they've been repeating this lie for the last 40 years on a constant daily basis. That some people, that's all they know. And I have a question for you guys. What do we do to deconstruct the individuals that raise their kids in these lies and their grandchildren, that to make them believe that they had native ancestry, but which was false? And how do they come to terms with their own family history and their own persona that they built through the years? And that's a question that I ask myself, because once they acknowledge that they're not a Beneki, well, we got to reconstruct like 30 years or 40 years of their persona that they built.
That is a good question, because I do think there's a lot of people. There are a lot of kids now who've grown up with a native identity that they don't have. And what do you think, Dana? Where do you begin? Well, I guess I should say I try to make some, in the past, I've probably made some missteps myself. And, I have these shows now, try to make up for missteps. But where do you begin, Dana, with re-educating people? Because I don't think you're going to get a lot of help from the school systems either.
Oh, and there is a group I've talked to, without, I guess, throwing a bunch of names out there. There's they're receiving some of these groups receive state funds, or even pushing for federal funds to introduce more Native American
Curriculum?
education in the school systems. And I've already called and said that my kids, won't be participating, because that's not they're not going to learn the culture of people that are not of Abenaki descent. And unfortunately, it's kind of someone has to break that cycle of information and miscommunication, and and that's, I guess, is a personal thing too, right? You to look within yourself to acknowledge that you may want to live the lifestyle of a Native American, but you're not. Deep down, you're not, and and then everybody else um, that is suffers for it, and takes away their true identity.
Have you Jacques or anybody from the reserve done any educational things across the border here? I mean, just across the border. I mean, like Newport, Derby, and such.
We're trying to. More and more organizations are reaching out to us because they said if I can just backtrack a little bit and say some people ask us what harm are they doing. So we these groups they're preserving culture, they're making baskets and all that. I said the harm that it's causing is that you're representing a culture that is not yours, and they came in our community and took everything that was beautiful, the songs, the language, the basket, the arts, and they left. When we started asking question, who are you related to, because nobody wanted to be an Indian in Quebec in the 1990s when they were coming to Odanak because of the Oka crisis in 1990, where there was a confrontation between a reserve, which is not far from Odanak, and the Canadian Army, and it's called the Oka crisis. So nobody in the 90s wanted to be a native, and we saw these people come in here. We welcomed them because they said they were from Vermont, and we knew that our family was back there. But today we can fact check in an instant with our cell phone. But back then you had to trust the individual, and who would lie about being their culture? So that was the first time we were faced with cultural appropriation. And when we started asking questions, they all disappeared and went back to Vermont. So what I'm trying to say is that they came and they took everything that was beautiful and they left us with the intergenerational traumas, all the racism, all the ugliness of being told that we're only savages, but being told by the schools, by the government, by the white settlers across around surrounding the reservation. And it's only like recently that the people we're talking about healing and all that there, but there was a time not too far, even I can remember when I was young, it was kind of rough to be to be a native. So they we do try to reach out because we got a museum here in Odanak and we do school curriculums for the province of Quebec, and now we've been reaching out because they say, well, how come now we've been proactive for the last 2 years, more in the state of Vermont, but we've been raising the red flag for the last 20 years. And we went to the state legislator with Skip Bernier to protest against the state legislation in 2011 about the state recognition. And we were told by the state legislator that we're not from the state of Vermont. We're not Vermont voters. We're not Vermont taxpayers. You have no say in this proceeding. So go back to the United States. And you're not even from this country. So we were, by the Senate committee, basically pushed aside to say, these are not your ancestral territory. You should have stayed, but history is history, and those are our ancestral territories, and we didn't even have a right to say to intervene in these proceedings, and so yeah.
Yeah. Okay. We only have about 5 minutes left. What more would the two of you like to say? And what are your hopes?
Well, it's for the citizens of Vermont there to and the Northern Kingdom to do their due diligence and ask the question to these individuals that claim Native ancestry, and you have the right to ask a question because we share those territories. We've been sharing those territories for the last 400 years, and it's to be honest with everybody that occupies Vermont there. You can't live a lie and benefit from off of living a lie. That's just shameful as a human being. So we deserve better as human beings there, and these groups are misleading all the bunch of us. So I just hope for a happy, not happy ending, but for the state of Vermont to revoke this legislation and just move on. Let's all move on in an honest way.
Right. And you know what is, I think we all should be proud of our ancestry. You should be proud of your Abenaki ancestry and your European ancestry. And I don't understand why people can't be proud of
Yeah.
their ancestry. I'm about as well. I'm pretty much mixed. I will say, if you go by the DNA test, if you Dana, if you go your mother's line, when my wife had hers done, I have never found somebody as English pretty much as that, as your and her line, from at least where you guys meet up.
Yeah.
You're just about, that line is just about English. I'm English, Scottish, German. I got a little bit of sometimes it shows up Native American, but I have more African American in me. But so I celebrate it all, or I ignore it. It's just who I am.
Well, I mean, and I agree with Jacques. I want to see some accountability from the state, and for people that are from, descendants from Odanak, they don't fall between the cracks and left behind of their true cultural heritage, and to stop embracing four groups that cannot prove that they're Abenaki at all. And I'm going to continue to advocate for my ancestors and family members here, and with the state, and work with Odanak to find the balance if we can.
Don't worry. With some of the legislators, especially the current cast of them, don't be surprised if you get called racist for sticking up for your ancestry.
Yes, we get that a lot. We're doing the colonial white man's dirty work. That's what we're told.
Yeah. Now that doesn't surprise me, because that's the way our current regime in Montpelier operates. They say they're out to help you, but help everybody, but they actually pretty much make every effort to possible to oppress people. But okay, well, we have to wrap up. Another minute for each one of you.
Well, thank you for having us. Thank you for giving us the opportunity. And it's by having this dialogue that we slowly moving towards setting the record straight about the Abenaki history in the state of Vermont. So I thank you and all your listeners, and Dana for reaching out. And
all right, hey, thank you, and you were great. At least I have another contact person. There's an archivist that occasionally I ask a question to up on the reserve. I just can't remember her name. She's able to dig up some things for me periodically. So,
Marcel.
Okay, Dana, final words.
Well, I just wanted to say thanks for having me on today, Scott, and thank you, Jacques, for the history lesson that a lot of people need to hear, and need to hear it more often. So thank you for getting that out there, and hope to work with you guys some more.
All right, and thank you for reaching out to me.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Okay, thank you both. And thank you to the viewers for tuning in to another segment of the Northeast Kingdom Voice.